The grain that terrified an empire. In 1519, Spanish soldiers marched through the Aztec capital and saw something that terrified them more than any weapon. Not gold, not armies, a grain. Entire temples were built around it. Statues of gods were sculpted from its paste, mixed with honey and human blood, then eaten in sacred ritual. 20,000 tons of it flowed into Montezuma's treasury every year as tribute. Not wheat, not rice. A tiny seed that contained every essential amino acid grew in poor soil without irrigation and matured so fast it could feed a civilization between rainy seasons. The Spanish didn't just reject it, they criminalized it. Fields were burned on sight. Anyone caught growing it faced punishment. The goal wasn't agricultural, it was spiritual erasure. Destroy the grain, destroy the ceremony, destroy the identity. It nearly worked. For 400 years, the grain that fed the largest empire in the Americas was reduced to a roadside weed. Then, in 1977, a scientist sent a report to NASA. The agency was searching for the perfect crop to grow in space. They needed complete protein, fast growth, and zero waste. They found it in a seed the conquistadors tried to erase from history. This is amaranth. Welcome to Nature Unearthed. Before we open this vault, if these stories matter to you, the best way to preserve this wisdom is simple. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share these vaults with those who need to remember what we forgot. Seeds in the dust of empires. The archive opens in a cave in the Tehuacan Valley of central Mexico. Archaeologists dig through layers of sediment and find seeds. Tiny, pale, barely 1 millimeter across. Carbon dating places them at 6,000 years before present. Other digs in the same valley push the timeline further. Amaranth was cultivated in the Americas for at least 8,000 years, making it one of the oldest food crops on Earth. Long before wheat was sown along the Euphrates, before rice paddies spread across the Yangtze, indigenous farmers in Mesoamerica were selecting, planting, and harvesting amaranth alongside maize and beans. But amaranth was never just food. The Aztecs called it huautli. They wove it into every layer of their civilization. The Codex Mendoza, commissioned by the Spanish viceroy around 1541, reveals that 2/3 of all towns in the Aztec Empire were required to pay amaranth as part of their annual tribute to Montezuma II. 20,000 tons flowed into the capital city of Tenochtitlan each year from 17 provinces, carried by human porters, walking 20 to 30 miles daily along stone causeways. The grain was stored in massive granaries called petlacali. It was ground into flour for tortillas, boiled into atole, popped like tiny popcorn, and mixed with agave syrup into cakes. The sacred dough of the gods. But here is what made the Spanish reach for their swords. During the festival of Panquetzalistli, held each December in honor of Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and sun, Aztec women ground amaranth seeds and mixed them with honey to create a dough called tzoali. They shaped this dough into statues of their gods, mountains, deer, snakes, birds. 200,000 people gathered to consume these figures in ceremony, taking the god into their bodies. Blood was splattered onto the sculptures to magnify their sacred power. To the Catholic conquistadors, this looked like a pagan communion, a dark mirror of the Eucharist. They could not allow it to continue. In 1521, Spanish authorities banned amaranth cultivation. According to colonial-era accounts, those found growing it faced severe punishment, including, by some reports, having their hands cut off. Fields were burned. Temples associated with its ceremonies were destroyed. The friars called it an ungodly pagan food, something full of sin. But the ban was never purely religious. Amaranth represented something far more dangerous than a ritual. It represented independence, a grain that grew without permission, that fed without infrastructure, that sustained an empire without European intervention. A people who could feed themselves could not be controlled. The seed NASA chose for the stars. Now here is what they tried to bury. Amaranth grain contains 13 to 17% protein. Wheat contains 8 to 11%. But the gap is not just quantity, it is quality. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations has stated that amaranth protein is superior in content and quality to traditional cereals. It is rich in lysine, the essential amino acid that wheat, rice, and maize all lack. It contains the building blocks that beans and lentils miss, and the building blocks that grains miss, in a single seed. Unlike every major cereal grain on Earth, amaranth protein is complete. Every essential amino acid the human body requires is present in a single seed, barely the size of a poppy seed. But here is what most people have never been told. Amaranth oil contains squalene at concentrations of 6 to 8%. That is the highest of any plant-based source ever measured. Squalene is a compound your body produces naturally, but makes less of as you age. It is a powerful antioxidant. Clinical studies published in the journal Lipids and in PMC have shown that amaranth oil inhibits HMG-CoA reductase, the same enzyme targeted by statin drugs. A seed the size of a poppy seed, doing what a $16 billion pharmaceutical industry sells pills for. And the science keeps going. Amaranth oil reduced cholesterol in animal models without the side effects of pharmaceuticals. Research on patients with coronary heart disease showed that incorporating amaranth oil into the diet altered fatty acid composition of red blood cell membranes in ways associated with cardiovascular protection. The grain the conquistadors burned turns out to contain a natural cholesterol-lowering compound that rivals the most prescribed class of drugs on Earth, the biological engine that defies drought. And then there is the photosynthesis. Amaranth uses the C4 photosynthetic pathway, the same system that makes corn and sugarcane so productive. But amaranth does something corn cannot. It thrives in drought. Its water requirements are less than 50% of wheat and less than 40 to 50% of maize. Its peak photosynthetic activity occurs at 40 degrees Celsius, a temperature that shuts down most food crops. In semi-arid regions where rainfall drops below 200 millimeters, amaranth still produces grain. Where wheat dies, where corn fails, amaranth survives. A single plant produces up to 60,000 seeds. Grain yields are comparable to rice and maize, reaching over 1,000 pounds per acre in the upper Midwest with no irrigation. This is why the United States National Academy of Sciences identified amaranth in 1975 as a crop with superiority and agriculture potential. This is why NASA recommended it for space missions, a crop that delivers complete protein, grows fast, uses minimal water, and produces edible leaves alongside its grain. The World Health Organization called it a well-balanced food. The plant the conquistadors burned was not primitive. It was ahead of everything they brought with them. And that is exactly why it had to disappear. 400 years of silence. The erasure was not accidental. When the Spanish banned amaranth, they did not just destroy fields. They destroyed infrastructure. They replaced the Aztec food system with wheat. They imposed the religion of a god who was worshipped through bread made from European grain. Wheat required European seeds, European farming techniques, European mills. It created dependency. Amaranth created sovereignty. And sovereignty was the one thing colonizers could not tolerate. For 400 years, amaranth survived only in the hands of indigenous farmers who grew it in secret, in remote highland villages in Oaxaca, in hidden mountain valleys, in the gardens of families who refused to forget. In the town of San Andres Zautla, Oaxaca, a farmer named Adolfo Lopez still grows amaranth grain and leaf on the same plots his family has worked for generations. NPR documented his work alongside a nonprofit called Puente a la Salud Comunitaria, which has reintroduced amaranth into the diets of over 6,000 families across 80 communities. In Guatemala, a researcher tracking the near-extinct white-seeded Mayan amaranth found a man named Claro selling popped amaranth candy at a village market. When asked where he got the seed, Claro said he got it from his father, who got it from his father. 3 generations, keeping a seed alive that empires tried to kill. The Berkeley Food Institute recorded the testimony of a horticulturist who called amaranth survival revolutionary. Somebody was hanging on to all the seeds, making sure that one day we were going to have this again. The grain survived because people risked everything to preserve it. Why the modern system still ignores it. But the suppression did not end with the Spanish. Modern industrial agriculture inherited the same logic. In 1975, a team at the United States National Academy of Sciences submitted a report that identified amaranth as a crop with extraordinary agricultural potential. That document landed on desks at NASA's Life Support Research Division, where scientists were searching for the ideal crop to grow on long-duration space missions. They needed a plant that delivered complete protein, grew fast in confined spaces, used minimal water, and produced zero waste. Amaranth checked every box, but what NASA saw as the future, the grain industry treated as a footnote. Today, the global grain market is dominated by wheat, rice, corn, and soybeans. These are crops that require annual seed purchases, chemical fertilizers, pesticide applications, and heavy machinery. They generate dependency at every stage of the supply chain. The global fertilizer market alone exceeds $200 billion annually. The global pesticide market exceeds $70 billion. Amaranth threatens this entire model. You cannot patent a grain that has been cultivated for 8,000 years. You cannot sell proprietary seeds for a plant that produces 60,000 seeds from a single stalk. You cannot sell irrigation systems to a crop that survives on half the water of wheat. You cannot sell herbicides to a crop whose wild relatives are already classified as some of the most resistant weeds on Earth. The grain they call a weed. And here is the final irony. The same genus that produced the sacred grain of empires also produced what modern agriculture considers its worst nightmare. Palmer amaranth, Amaranthus palmeri, a wild cousin of the grain amaranths, has become one of the most devastating agricultural weeds in the United States. It infests over 1 million acres in Georgia alone. It has developed resistance to glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup. It grows so aggressively that in southern Arizona, natural stands can produce 2.2 tons of dry biomass per acre within 4 weeks of emergence. The agricultural industry spends millions developing herbicides to kill it. University extension offices publish eradication guides. Farmers describe it as unstoppable. The same biological traits that made amaranth the perfect food, its C4 photosynthesis, its explosive seed production, its drought resistance, its rapid growth, are the traits that make its wild relatives nearly impossible to control. The irony is not lost. The qualities that sustained an empire for thousands of years are now classified as an existential threat to the crops that replaced it. But here is what the extension bulletins never mention. Palmer amaranth and the grain amaranths are different species. The cultivated varieties do not become weeds. They stay where you plant them. The industry treats the entire genus as the enemy because it is easier to sell herbicides against a family name than to admit that one member of that family could replace the crops those herbicides are designed to protect. The seeds that refuse to die. But amaranth never disappeared. In the highlands of Oaxaca, indigenous communities still cultivate it alongside corn and beans, the ancient triad that sustained Mesoamerica for millennia. In India, where amaranth traveled centuries ago along trade routes, it is called Rajgira, meaning king seed, and Ramdana, seed sent by God. Hill farmers in Nepal, Pakistan, and Tibet grow it on steep terraces where other grains cannot survive. In Nigeria and Mali, the Hausa people cultivate it as a leafy vegetable and grain crop. In Mexico today, you can buy alegria, popped amaranth mixed with honey, on street corners throughout Mexico City. The name means joy. Every Day of the Dead, amaranth seeds are offered as food for the spirits. The ceremonies the Spanish tried to destroy survive in new forms. In the last 2 decades, amaranth has begun entering Western markets. Health food stores carry amaranth flour. Gluten-free bakers use it as a wheat alternative. The global amaranth market reached approximately $9 to $13 billion in 2024 and is projected to more than double by 2034, driven by demand for plant-based protein and gluten-free products. Researchers in Africa are studying it as a weapon against malnutrition. Mexico's government included amaranth as a strategic resource in its national crusade against hunger. But notice what is not happening. No major government is funding large-scale amaranth agriculture to rival wheat or corn. No multinational seed company is investing in amaranth breeding programs at the scale given to commodity grains. The infrastructure of global agriculture remains oriented toward the crops that generate dependency. Amaranth, the grain that feeds without asking, remains a specialty product, a curiosity, a health food trend, not the staple it was engineered by nature and human selection to be. How to reclaim this grain. If you want to grow amaranth, you can. It thrives in poor soil. It tolerates heat and drought. Plant seeds after the last frost, a 1/4 inch deep, in rows 18 inches apart. The plants grow 5 to 7 feet tall with brilliant red, purple, and gold seed heads. Harvest when the seed heads begin to dry and the seeds fall freely when rubbed. Thresh by hand or against a screen. Pop the seeds like tiny popcorn. Grind them into flour for bread and pancakes. Cook them like porridge. Eat the young leaves as you would spinach, packed with iron, calcium, and vitamin C. Save the seeds. One plant gives you 60,000. Share them. Every seed shared is a piece of 8,000-year-old knowledge passing from one hand to another, the same way it survived the bonfires of 1521, the unfading grain. The word amaranth comes from the Greek amaranthos. It means the one that does not wither. The name was not accidental. In Greek myth, the amaranth flower was sacred to the gods because it never faded. The Aztecs knew this before the Greeks gave it a name. They watched the crimson seed heads hold their color long after harvest, long after drying, brilliant and unfading, as if the plant refused to accept that its season was over. This is not about a grain. It is about what happens when a food source is too free, too resilient, too independent to be controlled. The conquistadors burned it because it powered a religion they could not tolerate. Modern agriculture ignores it because it powers a biology they cannot monetize. The pattern is the same. When abundance does not require permission, it becomes a threat. But amaranth does not care about empires or industries. It does not care about patents or supply chains. It has been growing for 8,000 years. It survived the fall of the Aztec civilization. It survived 4 centuries of colonial erasure. It survived being reclassified from sacred grain to roadside weed. And right now, somewhere in the highlands of Oaxaca, an indigenous farmer is harvesting the same seed their ancestors protected when the fires came. The grain that does not wither is still here. Not because anyone permitted it, because no one could stop it. If this vault opens something for you, subscribe to Nature Unearthed and hit the bell. Every like and every share preserves what they tried to erase. The next vault opens soon.